No patient can be enrolled in Clarity 301 without IRB approval. That's not a procedural box to check. That's the ethical foundation that makes the trial possible. Osei, Arventa Global, Clinical Trial Manager. We use a central IRB, Advera, for most U.S. sites. One submission, one review, one approval that covers the participating institutions. Academic medical centers, Johns Hopkins, MD Anderson, Memorial Sloan Kettering, require their own local IRB review on top of the central approval. 45 sites means managing that entire matrix. The IRB reviews three things. The protocol: is the science sound enough to justify the risk to participants? The informed consent form: does it clearly explain the study, the risks, the alternatives, and the right to withdraw? And the investigator qualifications: is this site capable of conducting the trial safely? Our informed consent for Clarity 301 is 12 pages. In plain language, a patient with stage Roman IV lung cancer, reading about progression-free survival and docetaxel crossover provisions, needs to understand what they are agreeing to. A site cannot screen a single patient, cannot even tell a patient the trial exists, without a signed and dated consent form in the medical record. IRB approval is not the end of the ethics review. Every protocol amendment goes back to the IRB. Every significant safety finding. Annual continuing review. The ethics review is continuous throughout the trial. Agentforce regulatory document management tracks IRB submission status, approval dates, and amendment submissions across all 45 sites. The Institutional Review Board, purpose and structure. An Institutional Review Board, IRB, called an Independent Ethics Committee, IC, in most non-US jurisdictions, is an independent body constituted to review, approve, and provide continuing oversight of clinical research involving human subjects. IRBs are required by U.S. federal regulations, 21 CFR Part 56 for FDA-regulated research, 45 CFR Part 46, the Common Rule for federally funded research, and by GCP guidelines. An IRB must include at minimum 5 members with diverse backgrounds, scientists, non-scientists, and at least one member not affiliated with the institution. The IRB's mandate is to protect the rights, safety, and welfare of research subjects, evaluating whether the risks of participating in a study are justified by the anticipated benefits, whether participant selection is equitable, and whether informed consent procedures are adequate. IRB approval must be obtained before a trial begins at any site, must be renewed annually, continuing review, and must be reobtained when the protocol is amended or when new safety information emerges that might affect participants' willingness to consent. Central IRB versus local IRB operational implications. Historically, each site participating in a multi-center trial was required to obtain approval from its own local IRB, a process that created administrative burden, inconsistency across sites, and delays in trial initiation. The 21st Century Cures Act, 2016, and subsequent FDA regulations require U.S. institutions receiving federal funding to rely on a single IRB, SIRB, for multi-site studies, rather than conducting redundant local reviews. For Clarity 301, Advera serves as the central IRB for most U.S. community oncology sites. Large academic medical centers with established local IRBs, Johns Hopkins, MD Anderson, Memorial Sloan Kettering, may conduct their own review in addition to or in lieu of the central IRB review, depending on institutional policy. The operational implication for the CTM: managing a matrix of sites with different IRB configurations, some central only, some central plus local, each with different submission requirements, review timelines, and continuing review cycles. A site that misses its annual continuing review deadline automatically loses IRB approval and must stop enrolling until renewal is obtained. The Informed Consent Form, Regulatory and Ethical Requirements. The Informed Consent Form, ICF, is the document through which a prospective research participant or their legally authorized representative acknowledges understanding of a study and voluntarily agrees to participate. FDA regulations, 21 CFR 50. 25, specify 8 required elements of informed consent: a statement that the study involves research, a description of the procedures, a description of reasonably foreseeable risks, a description of reasonably expected benefits, disclosure of alternative treatments, a statement about confidentiality, an explanation of compensation for injury, and contact information for questions. The ICF must be written in language understandable to the participant. FDA and IRBs increasingly require readability at an 8th grade level or below. For Clarity 301, the ICF explains the 2:1 randomization, the possibility of receiving docetaxel, with a crossover option to veliratinib if progression occurs in the control arm, the required tumor biopsy, and the imaging schedule. The ICF is not a waiver of rights. It is a communication tool, and obtaining consent is a process, not a signature. IRB review of the informed consent process. The IRB reviews not only the text of the ICF, but also the process by which consent will be obtained at the site. Adequate consent requires that the investigator or a qualified designee discuss the study with the prospective participant in a private setting, allow adequate time for questions, and ensure that the participant's decision to enroll is free from coercion or undue influence. In oncology, where patients may be desperate for treatment options, the informed consent process requires particular care. The investigator must communicate clearly that participation is voluntary, that declining will not affect the patient's access to standard care, and that the participant may withdraw at any time without consequence. IRB-approved sites must document the consent process, the date and time the consent discussion took place, who conducted it, and confirmation that the participant had an opportunity to ask questions. A consent that is signed before the discussion, or signed under time pressure at a clinic visit without adequate explanation, is a protocol deviation that can invalidate a patient's data and trigger a site audit. Protocol amendments and IRB re-review. Every substantive change to the protocol, a change to eligibility criteria, dosing, safety monitoring, or study procedures, requires submission to the IRB as a protocol amendment, and the amendment cannot be implemented at a site until the IRB has approved it. The only exception is changes made to eliminate immediate hazard to participants, which may be implemented immediately and reported to the IRB within 5 days. For the CTM, protocol amendment management is a significant operational challenge in a 45-site trial. Submitting the amendment to the central IRB, tracking approval timelines, managing local IRB re-reviews at academic sites, issuing updated protocols and ICFs to all sites, and ensuring that no site implements the amendment before receiving documented IRB approval. An amendment implemented before IRB approval is a GCP violation that will appear on any audit or inspection and requires a deviation report to FDA. For 45 sites, we evaluated 112. Osei, Arventa Global, Clinical Trial Manager. Site selection is not about which institutions are prestigious. It's about which sites can find the patients, consent them, treat them according to protocol, and collect clean data. Those are different questions. The feasibility questionnaire goes out first. Does the site see RET fusion-positive NSCLC patients? How many per year? Do they have NGS testing on site or send out? What's their screen-to-enroll ratio on similar trials? Are they currently running competing RET inhibitor studies? Of 112 sites that completed the feasibility questionnaire, 63 looked viable. We ran site qualification visits at 51. A CRA physically visits the site, meets the principal investigator and coordinator, reviews the regulatory files, evaluates the pharmacy, and assesses the data collection infrastructure. 22 failed the SQV. Some had inadequate staff. Some had infrastructure issues. Several were already running competing trials that would drain their RET fusion patient pool. 45 sites. Those are the ones we believe can do this. Then the Global Investigator meeting, 180 people in Chicago. 2 days. Protocol training. GCP refresher. Site initiation is not live until every investigator and coordinator has been trained and has completed all required regulatory documentation. You cannot rush site selection. A bad site costs you months. A fraudulent site costs you years. Agentforce site performance tracking scores each site against feasibility predictions throughout the trial. Site feasibility assessment, the enrollment prediction problem. Clinical trial site feasibility assessment is the process by which a sponsor evaluates the potential of investigator sites to enroll patients who meet the trial's eligibility criteria. In an oncology trial targeting a molecular subpopulation, RET fusion-positive NSCLC, feasibility assessment must estimate not just total NSCLC patient volume at the site, but the proportion who carry RET fusions. Approximately 1–2% of NSCLC, who are in the second-line setting, have received prior platinum-based chemotherapy and who are not already enrolled in a competing trial or ineligible due to prior RET inhibitor therapy. Feasibility questionnaires capture this information prospectively, but site-reported patient numbers are notoriously optimistic. Investigators consistently overestimate their enrollment potential because they report their total NSCLC patient volume rather than the eligible subset. Experienced CTMs and feasibility analysts apply correction factors to site estimates and weight feasibility scores by the site's track record on similar trials. Site qualification visit, operational assessment of site capability. The site qualification visit, SQV, is an on-site assessment conducted by the sponsor or CRO before a site is formally selected to participate in a trial. The SQV evaluates the site's physical infrastructure, adequate clinical space, pharmacy capabilities for investigational drug storage and dispensing, imaging equipment for protocol-required CT scans, staffing, qualified principal investigator with time to fulfill PI responsibilities, experienced clinical research coordinator, pharmacy staff, data entry personnel, regulatory documentation, curriculum vitae, medical licenses, GCP training records, financial disclosure forms, and systems capability, EDC access, electronic regulatory file system, laboratory processing, and shipping procedures. The SQV also assesses the site's competing trial portfolio. A site running 3 other NSCLC studies targeting similar patient populations may not have sufficient patient volume to enroll in Clarity 301 without compromising its other trials. Sites that fail the SQV are not selected. Sites with remediable deficiencies may be selected conditionally, with the condition that deficiencies are corrected before site activation. The principal investigator, qualification and responsibility. The principal investigator, PI, is the physician responsible for the conduct of the trial at each site. The PI's responsibilities, established by FDA regulations 21 CFR 312, 6312, 70, and ICH GCP guidelines, include conducting the trial in accordance with the protocol, protecting the rights, safety, and welfare of enrolled participants, obtaining and documenting informed consent, maintaining adequate records, supervising staff who perform trial-related activities, and promptly reporting adverse events and protocol deviations to the sponsor and IRB. The PI must be qualified by training, experience, and medical license to treat the patient population enrolled in the trial. For Clarity 301, PIs are medical oncologists with specific experience in thoracic oncology and molecular targeted therapy. The CTM verifies PI qualifications during the SQV, maintains PI curriculum vitae and medical license in the regulatory file, and ensures that the PI remains engaged in trial oversight throughout the study. Not just at site initiation. The investigator meeting, training the global site network. The Global Investigator Meeting is a 1 to 2 day event, typically held before the first site is activated, that assembles PIs, sub-investigators, and clinical research coordinators from all participating sites for protocol training, GCP education, and trial logistics briefing. The investigator meeting serves both operational and regulatory functions. Operationally, it provides consistent, direct training on the protocol, eligibility criteria, study procedures, and data collection expectations. Regulatorily, it documents that the trial team has been trained on the protocol before the first patient is enrolled. The investigator meeting agenda typically includes a clinical overview of the disease and the investigational drug, presented by the medical director, a protocol walkthrough covering eligibility criteria and study procedures, presented by the CTM, a GCP overview, laboratory and imaging logistics, pharmacovigilance and safety reporting procedures, and a site administration session covering regulatory file requirements and EDC training. Site staff who attend the investigator meeting are documented in the trial master file. Staff who join a site after the meeting require individual training, before performing trial-related activities, competing trials, and patient pool fragmentation. One of the most operationally significant site selection considerations in oncology is the competing trial landscape. In a molecularly defined patient population, like RET fusion-positive NSCLC, which represents approximately 1 to 2% of all NSCLC diagnoses, the pool of eligible patients at any given site is small. If a thoracic oncology site is running 2 or 3 other trials targeting RET fusion-positive or other molecularly selected NSCLC patient populations, those trials compete for the same patients. A site that could hypothetically enroll 6 Clarity 301 patients per year may only enroll 2 if it is simultaneously running a first-line RET inhibitor study, which captures newly diagnosed patients before they reach the second-line setting that Clarity 301 requires, and a pan-RET inhibitor salvage study, which captures patients who have already progressed on a first-line RET inhibitor, mapping the competing trial landscape at each prospective site using clinical trials. GOV, the site's own trial portfolio disclosure, and the SQV investigator interview is essential to realistic enrollment forecasting. A site is qualified. That does not mean a site is open. There are weeks of work between the two. Osei, Arventa Global, Clinical Trial Manager. Site activation is the process of taking a qualified site from signed agreement to first patient enrolled. It is a checklist with no shortcuts. The regulatory packet, protocol, investigator brochure, informed consent form template, financial disclosure forms, Form FDA 1572, the Statement of Investigator, which is the PI's legal commitment to conduct the trial per GCP. Every document must be received, reviewed, and filed before activation. IRB approval, the site cannot open without it. Drug shipment authorization, pharmacy is qualified, IMP release confirmed. EDC access granted, the site's coordinators can enter data. Lab manual distributed, central lab kit delivered. Delegation log signed, every staff member performing trial-related activities is listed with their authorized tasks. The site initiation visit, our CRA goes on site, walks through the protocol with the coordinator, confirms the pharmacy setup, verifies the regulatory file is complete, and clears the site for enrollment. That's the green light. Site status changes from qualified to active in the trial management system. The site can now consent its first patient. We had 45 sites selected. We activated them over 19 months. The ones that activate fastest are the ones with experienced coordinators who have done this before. Agentforce site activation workflow tracks each document, each approval, and each pending task for every site in the network. The regulatory startup package, required documents before first patient. Site activation in a clinical trial requires assembly and execution of a defined set of regulatory documents before any trial-related activity, including patient screening, can begin. The core regulatory startup documents for a U.S. site include the executed clinical trial agreement, the contract between the sponsor and the institution, the IRB approval letter and approved ICF, the signed form FDA 1572, Statement of Investigator, CVs and medical licenses for all listed investigators, GCP training certificates for all trial staff, financial disclosure forms for all investigators. Required under 21 CFR Part 54 to disclose financial relationships with the sponsor that could introduce bias. The laboratory certification and normal ranges for the site's clinical laboratory, and drug storage and dispensing authorization from the site pharmacy. These documents are filed in the Trial Master File, TMF, the regulatory record of the trial, and must be available for inspection by FDA or other regulatory authorities at any time during or after the trial. Form FDA 1572, the Statement of Investigator and its legal significance. Form FDA 1572 is a regulatory document in which the principal investigator commits to conducting the trial in accordance with the protocol, GCP regulations, and applicable regulations, to personally supervising the study, to ensuring that all sub-investigators are informed of their obligations, to maintaining adequate records, to promptly reporting adverse events and deviations, and to obtaining IRB approval and informed consent from each participant. By signing the 1572, the PI creates a legally binding obligation to FDA. Providing false information on a 1572 or conducting a trial in material violation of its commitments can result in disqualification from participating in future FDA-regulated research, and, in cases of fraud or serious misconduct, criminal prosecution. The CTM ensures that 1572s are completed accurately, listing all sub-investigators, using the correct protocol version number, and specifying the correct IRB before the site is activated. The site initiation visit, the operational clearance checkpoint. The site initiation visit, SIV, is an on-site visit conducted by the sponsor's CRA or study coordinator before the first patient is enrolled. The SIV agenda covers protocol training, reviewing eligibility criteria, study procedures, and safety reporting in detail with the site's PI and coordinator. Regulatory file review, confirming that all required activation documents are collected, executed, and filed correctly. Pharmacy assessment, confirming that the investigational drug has been received, stored at the correct temperature, and is ready for dispensing. EDC and laboratory logistics training, demonstrating the electronic data capture system, reviewing the central laboratory kit and shipping procedures, and informed consent process, review, walking through the ICF, and confirming that the site's consent process meets regulatory requirements. The SIV is documented in a site initiation visit report, filed in the TMF, and must be completed before the site status can be changed to active in the trial management system. The trial master file, the regulatory record of the trial. The trial master file is the collection of documents that individually and collectively allows verification of the conduct of the trial and the quality of the data generated. ICH GCP Guideline E6 specifies the documents that must be in the TMF, both at the sponsor level, essential documents held by the sponsor, and at the investigator level, essential documents held at the site, called the Investigator Site File, or ISF. In an FDA inspection, the TMF is the primary evidence that the trial was conducted in accordance with GCP. A missing or incomplete TMF raises questions about whether the trial was conducted properly and can result in the data being considered unreliable for regulatory purposes. For a 45-site Phase 3 trial, TMF management is a significant operational undertaking. Thousands of documents across 45 sites, each with different versions and approval dates, must be filed, tracked, and maintained in a complete and current state throughout the trial and for a defined period after completion, typically 15 years for a pivotal trial. The delegation log, the chain of authority for trial-related activities. The delegation log is a site-level document that records which staff members are authorized to perform specific trial-related activities and the dates of their authorization. Only staff members listed on the delegation log and qualified by training to perform the delegated tasks may perform those activities. Common delegated activities include obtaining informed consent must be a physician or qualified designee, performing study procedures, phlebotomy, vital signs, study drug administration, entering data in the EDC, and completing adverse event reports. The delegation log must be updated whenever a new staff member joins the site, an existing staff member's responsibilities change, or a staff member leaves. A task performed by someone not listed on the delegation log for that task is a protocol deviation. For a multi-year trial at 45 sites, staff turnover is inevitable. The CTM and CRA monitor delegation logs at each site to ensure they reflect current personnel and that new staff receive protocol training before they are added to the log.